Hello, everybody. Welcome to the community meeting for the East Metro Drinking Water Plan. I still see a few folks rolling into the WebEx here. I'm going to give it one more minute. Just make sure as many folks that want to participate can get signed on before we get started. So please hang tight for another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Thanks. Okay, good evening, everybody. Looks like the number of folks signing on has started to slow down, so why don't we start to ramp up here. Welcome to the community meeting for the East Metro Drinking Water Plan. My name is Mark. I will be moderating our meeting and our discussion here this evening. Just in terms of how we want this to work, to keep everything running as smoothly as we can. One, I wanted to let you all know that we are recording this meeting through the WebEx software. We did that with the public meetings last fall when the draft plan was released. And if everything goes smoothly and if the sound quality is good, the MPCA may post that recording to their website so that other folks, other citizens can log on and listen and watch the meeting at their convenience later on. If you've signed on, I see there are a number of folks who've signed on by calling in. It looks like there are a bunch of folks, 4 or 5 of you, who've just called in. There are going to be slides to present the conceptual drinking water supply plan. So if you're able to log on via computer, if you haven't already, that might be helpful. There'll be some information on screen that might be useful to you. It looks like everybody's keeping themselves muted. So just as a reminder, if you could do that, if you're not actively asking a question or offering a comment, and we'll get to how that's going to work in a moment, but it'd be very helpful if everybody keeps themselves muted. So that way we don't get a lot of feedback noise. Myself and my colleague Sarah Chadwick, who are we're able to control the WebEx. If we do hear some feedback noise from folks, we will mute you. So just keep in mind, you're almost certainly muted when you go to ask a question, and you'll have to unmute yourself first. The controls for muting and unmuting yourself are at the bottom of your screen. There should be a button to the left that says mute, unmute.
If you
click on that will unmute you, and you'll be able to we'll be able to hear you at that point. Like as I mentioned, we are going to have a presentation. If at all possible, we try to hold questions and comments until the end of the presentation. When we are done with the presentation, you can either use the chat function at the lower right of your screen. There's a button that says chat. If you click on that, you'll be able to type in a question or a comment. Sarah and I and other folks will be monitoring that chat, and we will be sure to raise any questions or comments that are entered into the chat along the way. You can also unmute yourself, as I mentioned before, and just offer your question or comments verbally. If you do run into any technical issues, if you're not hearing the audio, if the slides aren't showing up right, please send a message via the chat to Sarah or myself, and we'll see if we can get that resolved for you. Let's see, I think that's everything in terms of kind of how this is going to work and ground rules. You're going to hear tonight from 2 folks from the Department of Natural Resources and the Pollution Control Agency. You're going to hear from Jess Richards, the Assistant Commissioner with DNR, the Department of Natural Resources. He's going to kick us off with a little bit of an introduction. And then you'll hear from Kirk Kudelka, the Assistant Commissioner with the Pollution Control Agency. He's going to take us through an overview of the plan. They'll be available throughout the meeting to answer your questions or respond to your comments. I think the presentation will take just a small portion of the meeting. We have a lot of time set aside for discussion and comments, so there should be plenty of time to get to everybody's thoughts, comments, and questions. With that, I think I will turn it over to Jess Richards, Assistant Commissioner with DNR, to kick us off. Jess, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everybody. I hope you're having a great fall, and thank you for coming tonight. As Mark said, my name is Jess Richards, Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And along with Assistant Commissioner Kudelka at the MPCA, we've been leading the state agency work on this drinking water supply plan for the last few years. On August 18th, after careful analysis and healthy debate, we released the final drinking water supply plan for the East Metro area. We've had tremendous assistance over the years from local communities and work groups involved with the effort, and their participation was absolutely vital to get us to this point. We may not have always had agreement on a variety of topics, but we always came to it with one common goal, and that was really to design the best possible path forward for the use of the 3M settlement funds to ensure the safety and sustainability of drinking water for the people of the East Metro for the long term. So really, on behalf of the state employees and our consultants and contractors involved, I really want to thank the communities and the work group members and all of you in the public for your contributions to this effort over the last few years. As we completed the final plan over the last several months, we had to make a number of difficult decisions, constantly weighing benefits and risks and the costs of any given path forward. We had to consider individual wants and the needs of each community and of private well owners, and we evaluated all of those in the greater context of the entire East Metro area. And in the end, we believe what we delivered the East Metro is a plan that will be comprehensive and safe and sustainable and resilient and flexible going into the future. It's a plan that will not only allow us to move forward together to implement the good work that the team and the community put together, but to secure the long-term drinking water safety for all the communities. And with that introduction, I'll pass it on to Assistant Commissioner Kudelka to walk you through some of the plan details. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess, and I'd share Jess's welcome for everyone here for joining us tonight. All right, just kick off the presentation here. So, now is the culmination, a lot of work by the state agencies, local governments, working group members, and others since the PFAS was first discovered in drinking water in wells, drinking water wells in 2004. And even since the 3M Natural Resources Settlement in 2018 was settled. So this has allowed us to put forward a long-term proactive plan for the 14 affected communities. And as noted, this does cover an area of 150 square miles. Today, about 174 Minnesotans live there, but by 2040, 225,000 are anticipated to be living in this area. So we wanted to make sure we are able to provide safe drinking water now and into the future. And just want a reminder, systems are in place currently to ensure safe drinking water while we worked on this plan and are going to be implementing the long-term solutions outlined in the final conceptual drinking water supply plan. And this is being done whether it's a municipal system where we're addressing any wells that exceeded health-based values or private wells. So as Jess mentioned, this plan has a number of themes to it and qualities. The first is it's a comprehensive approach. It covers private and municipal well users. It covers all 14 communities and addresses not only what comes out of the faucet, but also the source of the problem, the underlying contaminated groundwater. This provides safe and sustainable drinking water. And we do this by providing and meeting the Department of Health's health-based values for drinking water now and into the future. This ensures continued access to drinking water without causing any localized water availability issues. And overall, the system being put in place under the final plan is financially sustainable into the future. The plan is resilient. We mentioned before that any well that exceeds the health-based value set by the Department of Health will receive treatment. We build an additional layer of resiliency by going beyond that by providing treatment to include those at greater than half of the Department of Health's current health-based values. What this does, it creates resiliency in the system by having treatment in place already to proactively address any future changes to the health-based values, the science, changing levels of PFAS that may be seen in individual drinking waters into the future. This is also more cost-effective if we build systems for the future in mind. Centralizing systems versus facilities at individual wells as that issue appears is much more cost-effective than doing that different things at different wells. The system is also flexible. We provide funding levels so cities can adjust and accommodate individual preferences, outside impacts and influences, and cost overruns. We do this through a large dollar set aside for contingency, along with time for communities that may need more time to implement those solutions, to make the decisions that have to be done on a local level. We fund three main priorities. The first is capital infrastructure. For a private well owner, this will look like a whole home treatment system, otherwise known as the point of entry system, because it treats the water as it enters into the house. Individual homes or neighborhood hookups could also be done to existing municipal systems. So where a water line may already run in front of a house, that may be the avenue to provide safe water to those individuals, private wells. For municipal well users, what this will look like is treatment systems being placed on the municipal wells, new wells to replace some that are already been heavily impacted, and interconnects to provide resiliency to communities that may not be impacted at this time. Now, all that money going to capital is important, but it doesn't mean much if there isn't the dollars there to operate them long term. And this plan invests in operation and maintenance dollars to ensure systems being built today can operate decades into the future, whether that's a municipal well or someone relying on a private well for drinking water. And then finally, large investment in drinking water protection. It's the only one of the three that actually addresses the source of the problem, and that's the groundwater contamination. This provides protection for those areas that may not be impacted at this point or only at low levels. Prevention is better than having to treat later. It also helps reduce levels long term for wells that may be heavily impacted. And so the final plan here invests in those areas, and you can see here the larger 45% of those capital costs for drinking water systems, municipal and private, dollars for the operation and maintenance of those systems, and also then a large contingency to address where we may have gaps or cost through into the future. So I just want to highlight a little bit that large number for contingency. How is that going to work? What would that be spent on? First of all, the contingency works so that if there are changing health values or different readings or samples are taken, if the plume moves or we have a better detection method, we can detect PFAS at lower amounts than before, these dollars will be there available to make sure those well owners into the future are able to be provided treatment. In addition, while these are estimates, we do have money set aside for if there are cost overruns. If something were to come up where the project is cost more than we have estimated, this pot of money will be available to allow for those projects to move forward. What we don't want to do is build 4 walls and then not have enough for the roof. And then finally, another potential use for the contingency is alternative drinking water as a source. This is money reserved for making sure that communities that may need to provide other alternative ways other than groundwater for their drinking water to have dollars available for those sources. We do want to highlight, because this is one of the things that comes up quite often, is how does this work if a settlement runs out of dollars? And so we just want to highlight this in a little bit. To start off with, the drinking water costs for the settlement will be covered with those over a health-based value, or advisory. And just a reminder, a health advisory is issued when the readings for a municipal or private well exceeds the health-based value set by the Department of Health. In the plan I mentioned, we built resiliency in, so we'll be pre-positioning some treatment in areas where there is less than what's the threshold for a health advisory, a half of the health-based values. Those dollars for operation and maintenance, whether it's municipal systems estimated for 20 years or home private wells for 30 years, will be covered by the settlement. We will be investing these dollars into the future too, so additional interest could change those periods of time that'll be covered. Even when the settlement does run out sometime into the future, if that happens, the consent order will click back on, and this is an agreement where 3M will be responsible for those wells and the long-term operation and maintenance that exceed the health-based values set by the Department of Health. Again, ensuring that safe and sustainable drinking water is provided to the communities into the future. Overall, the final plan provides for a number of pieces, and I'm going to go over some of the communities and some of the examples in a little bit, and we can talk some more about specific communities depending on those that are in attendance and where we'd like to spend some more time. But overall, what you'll see is 6 new or expanded drinking water treatment plants for the municipal systems across the cities, 33 wells that will be treated. These are municipal wells that service these communities. And then also, in addition to the 400 homes that are currently already or in the process of being connected to municipal systems, nearly another 300 homes will be connected to that to be providing safe drinking water through those systems in a cost-effective manner. And then finally, close to 1,000 private wells will have a whole home treatment system when the plan is fully implemented. So I just want to go through some of these communities here and go through some of these examples. Those communities, for instance, that are marked by a 1 here, Maplewood, West Lakeland Township, Afton, Denmark Township, Great Cloud Island Township. These are systems that only have private wells that are impacted by the PFAS contamination. In this case, what it'll look like is the state will oversee the installation and maintenance of the whole home treatment systems for private wells that exceed the values that I mentioned earlier. There will not be any connections to municipal systems in these areas. Lake Elmo is an example of how the final plan is flexible. There are questions on whether or not future wells can be placed within Lake Elmo's borders. Those items are outside of the forces that impact this area. The final plan sets aside money so the city can pursue a number of options to ensure residents have safe and sustainable drinking water. The plan is designed to navigate these various obstacles by providing that level of flexibility. The plan also highlights a number of homes that would be hooked up to municipal systems, neighborhood hookups. These are examples of both Cottage Grove and Lake Elmo, where I mentioned earlier, 400 homes are in the process or have already been hooked up to municipal systems, and we anticipate another nearly 300 homes to be connected. I want to highlight another example of how we've built in resiliency into the final plan. The city of Newport at this point does not have PFAS at levels that exceed the health-based values. It's only at very low levels, so providing safe drinking water. But we're building a level of safety into this by building some interconnects to other cities and communities. That way, if these wells in the future were to have PFAS over the health-based values, they can be quickly switched to an alternative drinking water source. In the case of Newport, where a city has very few number of wells close together, they would likely all be impacted at the same time. But we need to make sure we have an option to provide them safe and sustainable drinking water. The last slide here has a few more communities. I want to highlight Woodbury. Woodbury is an example of how we will continue to have temporary treatment systems in place, along with other cities such as Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, and Oakdale, where while the long-term solution is being built, these temporary systems will continue to operate. In the case of Woodbury, that's the temporary system located in the northern part of the city in the Tamarack well field, which services a few wells. Those will continue to operate while the large permanent system will be built to the south and will be able to handle more wells when it becomes fully operational. This is also an example of why drinking water protection is important. The eastern well field in Woodbury only has a low level detects of PFAS, those with the least stringent values set by the Department of Health. Future drinking water goals is to keep these in areas such as further east in Afton, protect those wells that are not impacted so that they do not need treatment in the future, whether that's a municipal well in the case of Woodbury or those private wells in Afton. Now, there's a lot of information here, and we've just given you a little bit of a highlight tonight of it, and we're happy to talk into more details of this, but wanted to provide some more information for you to be able to look at this, and if you have questions, feel free to get back to us later too. The first is our website, 3msettlement.state.mn.us. On there, we have a residence guide that really talks about the overall plan and how it was put together and how it meets the drinking water needs for safe and sustainable drinking water into the future. On the website, each of the 14 communities has a page dedicated to them that goes into how this plan impacts their communities. In the case of private well owners, we talked about in some cases, they may receive a whole home treatment system, or they may be hooked up to a municipal system. We have an interactive map, so one can type in their address as a private well owner and see which of those options may be for their remedy moving forward. And in those cases where there are very small amounts of PFAS, where there would not be treatment at this time. Want to talk about the next steps here. Right now, the state is ready to provide the funding to the communities for project implementation. Communities right now are being surveyed to collect that information, to start those agreements, and to start moving forward with the planning design dollars for the projects that are mentioned in the plan. You know, we are moving forward to make sure these are addressed, and we'll be executing these as they come in, so that the dollars can start flowing. And in the case of the private well owners, it will be the state reaching out to individuals to install and maintain those whole home treatment systems when appropriate. Letters will be sent out. I do, again, just want to reference a couple ways to contact us and get more information. Again, the 3M Settlement website, our main PFAS and 3M Settlement email address, which you can send any questions that you may have. And then please do go to the website and sign up for Gov Delivery. It's a way to get email updates on this process. Because as we move forward through the implementation, facilities are being built, things start becoming operational, we will be presenting updates to the working group through the website and the Gov Delivery system. So with that, I will open it up for any questions and go from there.
Okay, thank you, Kirk. This is Mark again. There was a question in the chat, so I'll start there. Question from Stephen Johnson. Wells without a health advisory will be responsible for their own filter system. Does that mean if they exceed health standard after a certain date, the settlement won't fund a POET? If so, what's the cutoff date?
Good question. Let me see if I can go back to a graphic that may help here. So right now, the plan includes providing treatment to a municipal system or a whole home system if they meet half of the health-based values or health index set by the Department of Health. And so those systems, if there's not one there already, would private home, the state would reach out to those homeowners and provide them the opportunity for that system, or hook them up to a municipal system if there's a water line already running in front of their homes. Those costs are covered by the state. The operation and maintenance of those systems would continue to be operated and covered by the state through the settlement, as long as the operation and maintenance dollars are still available. We've estimated that the amount of money set aside for that would be 30 years. So when the settlement does run out of money, those that do not have a health-based values, those that do not exceed the safety level set by the Department of Health, would have to be on their own at that point. But that is into the future. While we have the estimate of 30 years, that is an estimate. We will be investing these dollars. And if the investments go well, those dollars would be able to be used to operate and maintain these systems further into the future. So the question was then to, what if a year from now, I get my first test, I'm a private well owner, it's over a health-based index of 1 and receives that well advisory. You would get a letter from the MPCA or Department of Health providing treatment to you moving forward if you're over that health-based advisory. We built the plan so that we knew that homes may have different results into the future or be sampled for the first time in the future. So we do want to make sure we're providing for those homeowners too.
Let me check back with Stephen Johnson, who asked that question. Is that, feel free to, if you need a follow-up or if that wasn't clarify everything, feel free to unmute yourself or ask another question in the chat. There are a number of questions coming in. Oh, go ahead.
What I think I understand you saying is basically that the system's going to be covered between 0.5 and 1 until the operation and maintenance money runs out, and then only those with a health base value of over 1 would switch over to the consent order. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, Stephen, does that clarify it?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So a number of other questions coming in through the chat. I'm going to try to go through these in order. I'll group them if I can. But folks, if I miss yours or don't get it right, please unmute yourself and feel free to correct me. So a couple of questions from someone labeled GGS. I assume that might be some initials. What is the timeline for the new long-term water treatment center in Woodbury?
Sure. We have some information, and I can share that to you. We've already been working with the city of Woodbury to start the land purchase for where the treatment system would be located. The city of Woodbury is already working with their consultants, have been meeting with us to pull together what's needed for the design and the planning for the system. That will determine how long it takes to build out the system. But the city of Woodbury is raring to go. They've been doing, their homework beforehand to be ready in a spot to move forward as soon as possible. So that is moving forward. They're already working on the design and planning pieces to start that effort. How long it's going to be constructed, it's going to depend on what that plan states. But I just want to reiterate, there's still safe drinking water for the residents of the community of Woodbury because the city has worked with the state to provide temporary treatment for a number of wells to meet the needs of the communities. And some of you may have seen the temporary facility in the Tamarack well field so that those communities right now are receiving safe drinking water.
Okay, thank you, folks. I see the questions coming in. I'm keeping track of them. So again, let me know if I miss one. So I've got a question from, I can't quite make out the name, might be some initials. But anyway, the question was, has anyone tested the water after the home filtration system has been put in place to see if it is bringing the water to safer levels?
So there's a couple pieces there. Let me just see if I've got that. Is that just question just for the whole home? Yes, we have tested many of the systems for the in-home granular activated carbon system, the whole home systems. And so that we have an understanding of how long they last, and we set them onto a year change out because that is the most conservative value that we see. Don't see that it being needed to be changed out before that time.
Okay. I'm going to keep going, folks. There are a lot of questions coming in, but if you need a clarification or follow-up, please enter another chat or unmute yourself. Second question from the person signed in as GGS, is part of the water treatment plan to recycle wastewater?
The answer is no, it does not include that. The plan for the conceptual drinking water supply plan focuses on the drinking water aspect of these communities.
Okay. Let's see, question from Richard. In Woodbury, the mixing of water from wells with less are being mixed with wells that have more. This has been going on for some time. Will that continue and why? It seems a poor option to continue, in my opinion.
So there are a number of wells that are currently proposed to be treated. Those would come into the system, and all those wells that are over a health index of 0.5 would receive treatment and then go back out to the system at large for those that are over the 0.5.
Okay, I've got a few more questions in the chat. I understand someone has their hand raised to ask a question verbally. I believe Robert Erickson, do you want to offer your question? You can unmute yourself and go ahead and we should be able to hear you. Are you there, Robert? We can't hear you yet. Let's see if we can unmute you. Sarah, can you unmute Robert? If you can find him.
Is the water and still water affected? Hello?
But thanks, Robert. The question is the water in Stillwater impacted? No, where we've been following this is to the south of that area.
Is that a separate aquifer in Stillwater?
So maybe I'll turn it over to some of our hydrogeologists, but we've been tracking the northern boundary of where we see this contamination, and that eastern part of Washington County, that is the West Lakeland Township area, Lakeland area, and not to the north of that.
Thank you.
Questions on specific aquifers and that, I know Ginny is on from the Department of Health, if you'd be able to help with that one.
Hi, Kirk. Sure. Yeah, they use the same aquifer, but the groundwater in that part of the county is flowing east, southeast towards the St. Croix River. That's where the groundwater discharges. So there's really no pathway for the contamination down in the Lake Elmo, West Lakeland Township area to get as far north as Stillwater. We don't even see PFAS showing up in wells in the Baytown Township area. So there's really no evidence that there's contamination, either based on our sampling or based on all the modeling that's done, that there would be any risk to the Stillwater City wells.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Why don't I pause for a second, see if there's anybody else either with their hand up or who wants to unmute themselves and offer a question verbally. Anybody else want to do that on the line?
Yes, my name is Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. Go ahead.
You know, my question is, you've gone forward with plans for Prairie Island, and Prairie Island is not tribal land as of yet. It's still a private property owner. And it appears now that their plans include 80 plus houses plus commercial. And, you know, the monies can't be appropriated for a private property owner such as that without the local government having a say in it according to the Metropolitan Council laws. And so my question is, how is it that Prairie Island is moving forward, and why hasn't anyone been able to gain access to what those actual plans are? And finally, my other question is, you know, since West Lakeland is now going to be on private wells, you know, clearly making a municipal well on that corner is very close to a lot of the private property owners that were going to be on municipal water that are not now. And as the report reflects, you know, really no study has been done on the cone of influence of that well. And also, Valley Creek Trout Stream is only a quarter mile away, the headwaters to it. And there's no data showing anything about truly how much water will be pumped from it. Yes, it was an agricultural well, but a municipal well using the same size well as an agricultural well can use 1,000 times more water annually than an agricultural well would.
There's a few questions there, so I'm going to start right now about the plans. We work with the Prairie Island Indian community on their plans for those areas. They have public documents that they've shared with us that included the plans moving forward for the development there, those 80 homes. So that is something that we base that off of, just like The neighboring communities have plans, they put together comp plans that we relied on. We relied on the Prairie Island Indian Community's plans moving into the future there. You are correct, the Prairie Island Indian Community is not looking to build that tomorrow. They are looking to build that in the near future. We do anticipate, when that, we would not be building the treatment system until the future date when that development is, those homes are there. So there is going to be a little bit of delay for that process. My understanding is they have purchased that property already and are going through their development plans in that regard. I think those were some of the questions I'm.
Well,
Yes.
that's part of it, but the development plans have not been submitted to West Lakeland Township, or it would require an amendment to the comprehensive plan of West Lakeland and get approval from the Met Council and all the neighboring communities. Also, given the size of what they're proposing to do, it automatically requires a environmental assessment worksheet, which has not been done, as to the influence of that well. In particular, the wells over there are much different. The data that the subcommittee used to compare their well was used against Lake Elmo's, and they're, even though it may be the same aquifer, whether it be the Jordan or Prairie du Chien, it's on the east side of that Lime Rock Valley, so to speak, that goes north south through the, roughly speaking, about a mile or so to the west of Manning Avenue. So those aquifers there act dramatically different, especially given the close proximity to the Valley Creek trout stream and to the adjoining property owners that now are not going to be on municipal water. Putting a municipal well on that corner is less than a quarter mile from some of these houses. And you don't have to go more than a half mile before you hit a large number of houses in West Lakeland, therefore making a municipal well site, they carry second fiddle to private property owners in the trout stream.
But Charlie, I think you bring up a good point what the plan does and does not do. The plan puts forward how to provide safe and sustainable drinking water in the future, how it would cover the dollars for the treatment in that. That does not automatically approve any of these projects or waive any of the other regulatory requirements they would have to be. So for instance, the city of Woodbury or Lake Elmo or any others that need to move forward and go forward and get a permit for a well or have their drinking water plan reviewed, all that is still has to go. This plan does not waive or grant approvals to any of those other process, whether it's environmental review, permit review, and the like. In terms of the tribal nation and their, how they're work with local and state regulations, that is something that will have to play out through its natural process. Again, the plan does not waive any of that process as we move forward. In terms of the drinking water well impact being there, for all communities, we looked at the wells and the various scenarios we did to see if they would have localized impacts. Prairie Island Indian Community was one of those wells that we ran through a design groundwater model for the whole East Metro area, and we did not see those impacts there.
Good questions.
Where can we get that? Because that wasn't in the report. It showed the impact of other wells, new wells and existing wells in your addendum, appendix E, appendix EF. But clearly Prairie Island did not have that circle of the cone of influence on the adjoining areas. And the other thing is, it did not, in your preliminary report, it did show the amount of water that was going to be treated by them, which greatly exceeded what is needed for the number of homes that they have. And so the question is, people just want to see what are they going to do and have that transparency to know exactly what these plans are, how much water they're intending to pump, and for what, because clearly the numbers don't match up with the amount of water they're planning to pump with the plans that they've submitted to you.
Charlie, we do have this in our appendixes. If you'd like to shoot us an email, we could guide you to where that material is. My understanding, I'm just having some folks send me something. It's Appendix E, Figure E6, that does show down the potential drawdown through various areas. So the Prairie Island information is in Appendix E, but if you have follow-up questions, please let us know through that email address I showed earlier, or through the website. It has our email address there. We'd be happy to point to it.
I greatly appreciate that. Also, will they be required to do an EAW as would be required as a part of this process before they get any appropriations for money for the well? Because it clearly exceeds the levels required for an EAW.
So any entity would have to follow the applicable regulatory structure, whether it's environmental review or permitting. I am not an expert in tribal law, so can't say specifically how that would apply in this regard, but nothing in this plan changes the other regulations that are out there.
Well, thank you.
Charlie.
I appreciate that. I really do.
Great.
But,
Thank you, Charlie.
but I once again point out, they are not tribal land at this point. They are a private property owner within West Lakeland. They are not tribal land at this point.
Okay, Charlie, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna keep us moving. We do have a lot of questions. We might be able to come back to some of this. There are a couple of other questions in the chat as well about Prairie Island, so we may touch on this a bit more. But appreciate your questions. As Kirk said, you can send us an email. We'll try to get back to you specifically, and if we do come back to this issue, we'll certainly welcome your further input and questions on it here during this meeting. So let me move on. So I guess while we're let me come back to some of the chat questions. There are quite a few of them that I haven't gotten to yet. Folks, I am writing these down, so we should be able to hit them all, but please remind me if I've missed yours. So there's a question from Jennifer. Excuse me. When did you say Lake Elmo will complete the changeover from private wells to municipal water?
Sure. There are a number of neighborhoods that have already gone through this change. We had moved some of those forward, 3 or 4. The city of Lake Elmo is working with another 4, I believe it is, neighborhoods right now that they're in the very beginning phases of planning. And then there are another 3 or 4 that are designated yet to come. That still has to be played out. So there are 4 in process right now. Those other 3 or 4, I believe, that's something that's still being worked out. At some point, it is an issue of capacity. How much can a city all do at once? And the city of Lake Elmo has been phasing it to make sure that they're moving at a process that can make sure the projects are moving forward.
Okay, great. So a question from Mike, coming back to some of the questions around Prairie Island. Why is the Prairie Island Indian community being treated as a local government unit when the land they owned in West Lakeland is only owned in fee? It is not in trust.
Sure. So the Prairie Island Indian community is a government unit, such as the other government units that were part of this plan. You're right, they're not a local government unit, but they are government units, and they are residents in the East Metro that are being impacted by PFAS. And the plan addresses all residents, whether they're a township, city, or tribal government.
Okay. Maybe I'll do one more question from the chat before we open it up to verbal questions again. So question from Paul. My private well is currently below the threshold for a POET. How often should I have my well tested?
Sure. I'm going to ask the Department of Health for a little bit of help here. I'm going to start off at a high level because it's a good point that this brings up. Sampling will continue to occur in this area. The Department of Health, along with the MPCA, will work to do that. And we'll continue to monitor some of those wells that are below health-based values and through a schedule. How often that occurs is really going to depend on what level of PFAS is determined there. And I'm just going to see Ginny again ask for her help if I've missed anything there or any other advice that you have for folks.
Yeah, no, that pretty much covers it, Kirk. A lot of things go into a decision about the frequency for sampling of any individual well. It's based not only on the level that's in that well, but what's in the other wells in the same aquifer in your area, what's happening with the wells that are up gradient of where your well is located. And so there's a lot that goes into that. If you have a specific question about your particular well, I think the best thing would be to contact either me or Chris Formby at the Pollution Control Agency, and we can talk to you about what your well is already slated for in terms of frequency of sampling and what we think is going to happen going into the future.
Thanks, Jenny. Paul, hopefully that gave you some useful information. And with anybody else, just let us know if you have a follow-up either in the chat or by unmuting yourself. So why don't we, got a few more from the chat, but why don't I check back to see if there are folks who want to ask a question or make a comment verbally. If you want to unmute yourself, I think I see someone with their hand up. Robert, I don't know if you meant to have your hand up again or if that was left over from before.
I do have another question. I didn't.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't erase that. What can you speak to the mitigation that occurred at the dump sites? And was there some comment that I read where they're pumping water from underneath the dump sites as another step of mitigation?
Good question. There are 4 different disposal sites located in the East Metro. So I'm going to take them in 2 different chunks. The first are the Cottage Grove facility, the Woodbury dump, and the Oakdale dump. These are where 3M disposed of the chemicals. Each of those facilities had the material dug up and brought to a landfill in Dakota County that's lined. In addition, those facilities have pump and treat systems around it, which have wells that go into the groundwater. And the effort there and goal is to, if there's still stuff at the site, to keep it from going beyond the site. We monitor those wells to see the effectiveness of it, and we are working with 3M, for instance, on the Oakdale site, because we are seeing some material still leaving from the site to improve that system. The 4th system is the Washington County landfill, which is located in Lake Elmo. 3M also disposed of PFAS there. That is under the care of the state. That's called the closed landfill program. That site was handled a little differently. It was dug up, a liner was put down, and the material was put back in the liner and encapsulated with a cover on the site there. So just like the other material, it's in a lined landfill at a location, but that site there is now also had the material dug up and put into encapsulated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Other folks on the line who'd like to ask a question verbally, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay. You can continue to raise your hand and or when we open it up again, please do so. We've got a few more questions from the chat that we haven't got through yet. So a question from Roderick. What kind of exact measures will be used to evaluate if the plan is working?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I think that goes back to the monitoring. We want to make sure we're monitoring the municipal systems. They will continue to be monitored, just like any for PFAS and the other regulatory compounds through the Department of Health and through this process. And we'll also continue to look at the private wells and making sure that we're sampling to make sure that we have an understanding of areas that maybe that weren't impacted before and are in the future, so that we can provide treatment to individuals there. So our sampling is really going to go a long ways to determine whether or not we're achieving the goal, which is providing safe and sustainable drinking water there. There are other things such as the drinking water protection areas, protection dollars. As we implement those projects, we'll have systems put in place at the same time to determine their effectiveness, to make sure that they are working and moving forward. And if they aren't working as well as we had wanted, we would then be able to move forward.
Okay.
And I think just one other thing to highlight, this is not something where we put together the plan and walk away. There is a process. We'll be working with the work groups and do annual updates, continue to check on the system, looking at the continuous, looking at continuously and seeing where improvements may need to be made or plans shifted. Again, that's why the plan is meant to be flexible, to be able to do that, and why there is that contingency there to be able to address anything in the future that may be needed.
Okay, great, thank you. Continuing down, just to note, Janelle, I see your question about the contact information. We'll put that in the chat in a moment. So we will get that back to you. And maybe if Kirk, if you wanted to swap to that slide again, that might help some folks, where you had the email, the PFC email address up. So a question from Richard. Kind of relates back to the disposal sites. Will pumping of millions of gallons from the South Woodbury 3M dumping site need to be continued, and for how long? Is that not a part of this plan?
Sure. Thanks for the question. You're referring to the Woodbury dump, I believe there. That is something that will have to continue to be monitored, that site, to make sure that if materials are still there, PFAS, that they're captured and be able to be treated. That is something under the larger cleanup plan for the effort for the East Metro will continue on into the future. That's not part of the conceptual drinking water supply plan, but it is another plan that we do have that looks to make sure that those sites are not continuing to cause problems into the future.
Okay. I think, Kirk, we may have lost sharing of your screen. We might be looking at the slides in the WebEx now. So maybe Sarah, if you're in control, or can you take control and maybe move the slides to toward the end where we have the 3M Settlement webpage and the email contact information? I think that's what's going on anyway. It doesn't look like we're seeing Kirk's screen anymore. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. And then Paul, I just want to follow up. I think Paul it was that asked about well testing. Ginny added to the chat a little bit more information on that. She said, I forgot to mention that a sampling request form is on the NPCA DNR 3M Settlement webpage. So it's that webpage you're seeing on the screen now. And you can also find a link to it from the Minnesota Department of Health PFAS webpage. So you can get to that sampling request form from the website address you see on the screen now. And then Janelle, the contact information is on the screen there. You can use that email that bounces to several people on the team. And so that'll make sure your email gets to someone who can track it and make sure that you get a response. We had a question, Kirk, from Lori. Which PFAS chemicals do you test for?
Sure, I can, the health index set by the Department of Health is for 5 values that we look at when making decisions on whether or not treatment is needed. And that is PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, PFBA, and PFBS. Jenny and Gary, I know we sample these wells. We also sample for others that do not have health-based values, which we use to make our decisions, but is it a ballpark of how many others are included in those samples?
Hi, Kirk, this is Jenny. So we have 2 methods that we're currently using. One method that we've used for the full length of this investigation tests for 7 PFAS. So there are 2 more beyond the ones that Kirk mentioned. That's PFHXA and PFPEA, which we do not have health risk limits for, although we may have a new value for one of those later. That we're working on that right now. But this year, our lab developed a new method that can test for 26 PFAS chemicals, including some that most of those we just don't find in the East Metro, but we needed a longer list to start investigating other sites that have different mixtures of PFAS. we have a limited capacity in our lab to be able to use that method that has the longer list. So we are using it sparingly right now until the lab can increase their capacity to run those samples. They're being, that method is being used at a lot of landfills and firefighting sites. And so right now it's sort of a battle for space at the lab for analysts to be able to run that method. So in most cases, we are still using the method that tests for the 7 PFAS because we have a fairly good understanding of what we're finding out in the East Metro. When we do run that longer list, we typically don't see a whole lot else, just very trace levels of some of those other compounds. But over time, our plan is to transition to that longer list so that we're sure we're not missing anything.
Thank you, Ginny. I think I have one final question I see in the chat. Folks, feel free to enter other questions. We do have time. Question from Janelle: are there concerns about new private wells being drilled in Lakeland?
So the proposal does have Lakeland having a municipal system there. Those wells that have a water line that run in front of it already are homes. You know, if there were to be an issue there, they would be hooked up to the system. Jeannie, I'm going to ask for your help again here, but for any new construction, whether Lakeland or else, if folks have questions or concerns about PFAS and that, you just kind of talk through that process.
And Ginny, I was going to jump in. You're maybe a little bit quiet for a few of us, so I don't know if there's a way for you to increase the volume or adjust your headset or something like that.
Okay, let me see if I can. Yeah, my headset's up all the way and I just upped the volume on my computer. So I'll talk louder. How does that help? Is that better?
Yep, it is.
I'm not sure about new wells being drilled in Lakeland, where that might be occurring. We're mostly trying to get people connected to city water in the Lakeland area. So it would probably be better to talk about a specific location. I mean, the southern part of Lakeland isn't impacted the way northern Lakeland is. So it just depends on where we're talking about. But again, it might be best if somebody has a specific question about Lakeland that maybe they get in touch with me. You can either email me or call me. You can look me up. I'm Virginia.Yingling at the health department at Virginia.Yingling@state.mn.
Okay, and Janelle or others who have concerns about that, if you didn't catch that email address, another avenue is to use the email address on your screen, and folks can make sure that your question gets relayed to the Department of Health and can address that. And then Gary, another staff person from MPCA, put in the chat that the 3M settlement webpage, which you do see on the screen, has an interactive map which can help identify PFAS impacted areas relative to the locations of wells and such. I think, folks, I've gotten through all the questions I saw in the chat. Please remind me in the chat or unmute yourself if I missed a question from someone. It's possible that I did skip over one and didn't see it. So while we're seeing if any other questions come in on the chat, does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question verbally?
I have one last question.
Sure, go ahead.
What is the capacity of the aquifer? You know, if you're taking out a lot of water to remove PFAS down south, you have, you know, up to 100,000 more homes. What is the anticipated capacity of the aquifer?
I'm going to check in with our friends at DNR or others that help with some of that modeling. It's a good question about sustainability, and that we did, as mentioned on the plan and looking out at the 2040, what are those potential impacts as a result of the growth and making sure we provide that safe and sustainable drinking water to the communities. But the larger picture on sustainability, I think that's one I'm going to need to kick off to DNR if they have anything to contribute at this point. Otherwise, we can get back to you if you reach into us if we don't have the right people on the line today.
Yeah, Kirk, this is Jess. I could just follow up quickly. Just to echo what Kirk already said about the sustainability analysis that was done, and that analysis was done by DNR hydrologists along with our consultants hydrologists to look at if everything that was envisioned in the plan was implemented, would we have any concerns with sustainability of the aquifer or with surface water interactions, for example, and things like that. And so we could the conclusion being also that this plan could be implemented without having sustainability issues. At the same point, broadly speaking, I think you raised a really important point, is that groundwater sustainability and use and conservation is an extraordinarily important topic for all of us, regardless of which aquifer you're in, because they are a limited resource in the sense that you run into a year like this year where we have substantial drought or other things, and it's a little more difficult to recharge an aquifer. And so we're working with all the local communities on conservation measures and things that can help ensure long-term sustainability as well. We'd be happy, though, to follow up in more detail and connect you with the folks that did the actual modeling work if you had specific questions about this plan in this specific area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Other folks who want to ask a question verbally, I've got a couple of new ones in the chat, but I'll pause on those, see if there's other folks who want to unmute themselves. Okay. We got a question from Charlie. You sent that just to me, but I assume that it's okay for me to relay this. Asked where can we review the actual documents, plans, and permits submitted by Prairie Island to the co-trustees?
So in terms of permits, they haven't sent any permits into us. That's a different process. But if you, we can maybe touch base and see what we can do to get you what we have. I don't think we have what was in the appendixes and that information. I don't know if we have other things online too. So I think it would be good for us just to touch base and see what the best way to get you information that we have.
Charlie, maybe you could send a note to that email address on the screen, and we can follow up on that issue down the road.
Great, thank you so much. And so I assume, so if a permit is submitted to the DNR, it doesn't necessarily mean the 3M co-trustees.
So
like if they submitted a permit for a well.
Yeah, so DNR is the permitting authority for entities that wish to appropriate water that are subject to DNR's regulatory authority. I can't answer for you right now whether or not the tribal nation would be subject to that authority. They are a sovereign nation, and but we can look into what permits would be required, but also just rest assured that tribes do work very closely with the DNR, regardless of whether or not they're subject to permitting requirements, to work closely on sustainability and design and those kind of things. We'd be happy to look into that further and try to help figure out what permits and things would apply. But they're like Kirk mentioned earlier, they're not at the stage yet of even proposing the project per se for that kind of consideration.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie. I've got a question from Pete in the chat. I'm in one of the Lake Elmo communities being pushed to transition to municipal supply. Why can't we retain our private wells for irrigation?
So for those communities that those areas, neighborhoods would be hooked up to a municipal system proposed, the actual property owner can decide not to hook up and they can keep their well for drinking and irrigation. So that is the out, so to speak, for those folks if they want to keep their well for those services. If they are being connected to the municipal system, the sealing of the well is part of that. That would be covered by the settlements. And that is because if we're putting in that infrastructure, we're putting in the infrastructure for all of it. And then also, one of our goals in this area is that if there are wells that are not being used for drinking water, and that is to seal those so that we don't have other pathways to the aquifers that could create issues into the future. And so something that could be done is if someone wants to keep their own well, they would just not hook up to the municipal system, and we have a document on our website what that entails, then they would be responsible for the treatment of their drinking water since they didn't participate in the option that was presented and offered by the settlement.
Thank you for that question, Pete. Again, if folks have follow-up questions or clarifications, feel free to enter in the chat or unmute yourself and let us know what's on your mind. See, we've got a question from Paul. Do you have enough data to indicate? Sorry, do you have enough data to indicate if the PFAS levels are going down?
I'm going to turn back to Gary and Ginny because I know they have written on this at a high level of what we're seeing with the aquifers in various areas. Ginny or Gary, do you want to touch on that in just a high level?
Sure. That's Kirk's way of telling me don't get into the weeds on this one like I always do. So
we could talk about this for hours, and I just want to make sure we get to the
no, I know. By and large, what we're seeing is fairly stable old plumes, but there are some places where concentrations do seem to be going up, primarily down at the far end of the plumes as they're heading out towards the rivers. So either out towards the St. Croix or out to the Mississippi River. But there are places like in Lake Elmo, closer to the disposal areas, where we're actually seeing concentrations steadily decreasing. And so the cleanup actions that have been taken at the disposal sites have had a good effect. It's just it takes a long time for that to show up as you get further and further away from the disposal areas. It just takes time to propagate out through the aquifers. And then it really depends on where you are, whether you're stable, increasing, or decreasing. And so again, you want to shoot an email to that email address there. It'll get shopped out to one of the hydrogeologists to maybe answer specifics about your particular area.
This is Gary Krieger of the MPC, and as Kirk mentioned, we're going to continue to monitor private wells in the area that's already in existence, where we do have treatment systems in place for the homes, and really to kind of keep track of those levels of PFAS in the area.
Thanks, Ginny and Gary. I'll keep going here. Again, just let us know if you have a clarification in the chat or unmute yourself. Question from Rich. We are late to the meeting, and this may have already been addressed, but our question relates to the plan for the property owned by the Prairie Island Indian community. So this was addressed a little earlier, Rich, but we've got some time, so we can cover it a little bit again. Why are they being treated as a separate entity in relation to this settlement when they're in fact currently tax-paying landowners in West Lakeland Township, like all of us who live there? I understand they applied to put the land in federal trust, but that process is pending. Through this process, shouldn't they be subject to township laws and land use processes?
Thanks, Mark. Good question. Again, overall, the plan does not approve or replace any other permitting or environmental review process for any government unit, whether that's a township, city, or a tribal nation. All those things are still there. What we did is we looked at the planning for each of these communities out to 2040. So that's all the communities, townships, cities, tribal nations. And that does have the plan moving forward that the Prairie Island Indian community, the tribal nation, would be moving forward with their development there and a municipal system. That's why it's covered in there and includes estimates in there for the municipal system to move forward, and then that they would put in that well, and then the treatment system would be provided by the settlement. So that moves forward through that process.
Okay, last question I have in the chat. Folks, you can enter more. We'll open the floor up again for verbal questions. Question from Andrea, a follow-up to Pete's question relating to Lake Elmo wells and transition from private wells to municipal supply. As a follow-up to Pete's question, if we can keep our Lake Elmo wells, are you saying there will be no cost to us to not participate in the change to municipal water?
So I just put in a link to here. So if a neighborhood is to be hooked up to municipal water, this document here outlines what's there for the private well owners and what their responsibilities moving forward are under the settlement. Now, whatever happens or required because of a local government, that's not covered here. Local governments have those decision powers. But as you go through the document, you'll notice that if you do not hook up to the municipal system there, you will have to, after 2 years, be responsible for maintaining any treatment system on your property there and into the future. And that includes if you sell it to a new person, that they would have to hook up under their own dime. So you would have to disclose when you sell the property the presence of your well, any known contamination, and whether that becomes a stipulation in the sale agreement with the next buyer, all those costs would have to be covered by the private well owner. That is what the settlement outlines. Any other pieces that are dictated by local governments for connection or not connection up to municipal systems, that's up to them. But this is what's required by the settlement and those that decide not to take advantage of how the settlement is providing drinking water to these residents.
Okay. Thank you for all these good questions, folks. This is good, good question and answer. I don't see that anybody has their hand raised. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question verbally on the WebEx here? Feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and let us know what you'd like to ask. Anybody else want to ask a question? I don't think anybody has their hand up. Sarah, let me know if I'm wrong about that. Oh no, I do see one hand up. So Robert Erickson, I didn't tracking to see if that was again, or if, oh, looks like you took it away. Okay, never mind. Thank you, Robert. Anybody else that wants to ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand by clicking the little hand next to your name in the participant list. Okay. Anybody else have questions in the chat? I'm not seeing anything new. Please let me know if I missed your question, or if you have a new one, feel free to enter it now. Okay. It's quieting down. I'm not seeing anything further in the chat. I don't see anybody raising their hands or anybody unmuting themselves. So perhaps we've addressed everything that we need to address. Give it one more second just to make sure, in case there's anybody else. Okay, I think it's quieted down, Kirk and Jess, so doesn't seem like there's going to be any more questions or comments. So I think you can wind us down if you want to do that now.
We just want to thank folks for the time this evening. I think you can still see the slide that's up, our website. If there's more information on there, if folks would like to dive in, including some of the support documents that we talked about, or resources such as Ginny talking about and Gary talking about the sampling that's being done in the area, how to monitor that. We actually have an interactive website on there. Folks are interested to see what wells have been sampled and what wells have well advisory or health advisories and don't. It's a great resource out there. Again, just like the other one we have about what does the plan mean for the future for these individual private well owners. Also, there are a number of questions tonight about the municipal hookups and that process. We do have up there, and I put up the link here for the private well owners. If those folks do not hook up to the municipal system, what is their responsibility for that treatment moving forward? Again, local units of government may have other things that are included, and that's a decision up to them. And then overall, again, we understand that things change and progress, and we are committed to continuing to communicate through our website and Gov Delivery as we move forward. Our plan is to have annual reviews on the status of the plan, how its implementation is going on, are there changes or shifts that need to be done to invoke some of those contingency dollars on a yearly process. So, if you have want to follow along, have interest in that, please do sign up for our Gov Delivery. And if you wake up tomorrow and you had a question, you wish you asked us today, shoot us an email. We'll be more than happy to be able to provide you the information at that point. Just want to, on behalf of everyone at the agencies and the consultants, Department of Health, NPCA, DNR, consultants that helped us with this, the government units that were part of this, want to thank everyone from the public for being a part of this and spending your time with us tonight too.
Okay. Thank you, folks. I hope we addressed all of your questions and comments. You heard from Kirk there that you can email if you need to. And with that, I think we can call this meeting complete. Thank you so much for signing on, and enjoy the rest of your evening.